opportunity, along with this Catalogue Raisonné, to open up the subject for more research. Everybody knows Jewad Selim, right? Everybody knows the name, everybody celebrates Jamaat Baghdad and Hadith, the Baghdad Group for Modern Art, and Jewad Selim and CAMCSI. But to be honest, there has been little research done beyond what Jabr Ibrahim Jabra left us as sort of a heritage of the group and what they've done. And so what they did through the Catalogue Raisonné is collect a lot of archival material, translate, correct at some incidents, many of the information that we know about Jewad Selim. Most of the images I'm using today actually come from the book because they've higher quality, high res, as well as updated information. This is one of the only known photographs of the whole family of Jewad Selim, and you can see all of his siblings who are all in the arts. This evening we're sort of looking at sort of a very short period of Baghdad, an incident in the Baghdad history, let's say, through the eyes of Jewad Selim. So through his paintings, through the work that he was doing. And I wanted, I showed you a photo of, later photo of Baghdad, but this is Baghdad of the 1950s specifically that we're going to be talking about. Now, Jewad Selim, coming from this sort of heritage, artistic heritage, from starting with his father, but all of his siblings who ended up, being artists or were artists even before him, inherited this creativity, was very sort of supported by the structure of the family, and he was a very modern artist. He believed in modernism, he believed in modernity, and that it is the expression of the age, the representation of the time that is based on all the new scientific and intellectual ways of thinking about things. But we will see that many of the images that we're going to see of his paintings, we're looking at a different imaginative Baghdad that was not the modern Baghdad of his time. Talk about this more in a second. So, and many of you probably know that in 1951, him and CAMCSI established the Baghdad Group for Modern Art, which was a very important point of development in the aesthetics of Iraqi art, because after sort of all the building of consciousness of modernism as art and nationalism as identity, the group came to become a little bit more systematic in establishing a way of changing style and producing new images. The other groups before, very important, but they were more of introducing, of learning, of knowing. And Baghdad group, led by Jawad for more than with Shakir, because for a big chunk of, after the creation of the group, Shakir went on scholarship to Paris. And so he was not in Baghdad while much of this was happening. When he returned, it was towards the end. al-Hurriya was in installation and project, and then Jawad passed away too soon. The whole major shift happens to him after that. And this is in fact part of what the exhibition that Adbard looks at. So Jawad, a very, an interesting persona on his own as a person, very intense, very intellectual, very inquisitive. He specifically is a sculptor who wanted to recharge sculpture in Iraq, because in general, throughout the Arab world, sculpture was less known. The painting, existed because of whatever misconceived perceptions about what Islamic art allows and doesn't allow. But so sculpture was lacking, and for a country like Iraq with the Mesopotamian heritage of sculpture, Jewad Selim was specifically feeling the need to be the one to push sculpture and innovation in sculpture. And so he kind of struggled throughout his short career between painting and sculpture. He said that in letters, we were lucky that Jawad left journals and wrote letters to siblings and friends. And in one letter, for example, he says that he thinks in mass. He doesn't think in color or in line. Although, of course, you wouldn't really know that if you looked at his paintings. And there is a period of time where he focused more on painting, and it could be because he really tried for big sculpture. He really wanted and needed to do a big work of art. And there were several sort of, occasions where he was asked to do a proposal. He did. He had small reliefs, but he never really got the opportunity until, ironically, the end of his life, when so working on that project kind of caused him a lot of stress that ended up with his death. But that's, of course, a major legacy. What Jawad, despite of his short life, to be honest, someone was saying in the launch of the book that, didn't realize that it was only that many works that Jawad produced, because, everybody talks about Jawad, he is bigger than life. But the reality, actually, for his short career, he produced a lot. And he sketched a lot, he wrote a lot, and so he was extremely intense in terms of his production. And he was very inquisitive, read a lot as well. I mean, he was in Paris, he studied in Paris and in Italy, and because of World War II, that was interrupted. So a year here, less than a year there, and then after World War II, he goes to London to finish. But while he was in Paris for a year, he learned French and he was writing in his journal in French. So this tells you what kind of a person he was and what he wanted to accomplish and in a rush. And he was very charismatic. He was very outgoing, and that kind of helped his goals a lot. So I want to give you an idea of what Baghdad in the 1950s looked like. It was a modern city, being modernized. A lot of, Baghdad is a city that went through a lot of drastic destruction, burning and several times. And so very little is left of the Abbasid Baghdad in terms of heritage in the city itself. But so that meant Baghdad was a very modern city being developed in the 1950s. Yet, and the 1950s that everyone, particularly after 2003, I think, nostalgia to the better times, whether it's the monarchy or, the golden age of the 1950s, sort of, gives you the idea that, everything was settled and everything was going great, but in reality, it was a city, Baghdad was a city under a lot of stress. There was corruption, there was lack of shortages of food, of medicine, there were a lot of discontent with the developments that were happening, and you can kind of see in this sort of very short outline timeline that I provide of some of the things that were taking place. So, because this also brings the debates among Iraqis today, is 1958 a revolution or a coup d'etat? So, and so, a modern city that is where they're living, a modern way of thinking, a modern person. However, at the same time, Jawad Selim was very conscious of his heritage and the past. And so, working at the Museum of Antiquities, where he was renovating, restoring works, but also studying the sort of, by now everybody knows the story of the finding of the Maqamat al-Hariri. But what the Baghdad Group for Modern Art were wanting to achieve, led by Jawad Selim, is a continuity in history. So, finding Maqamat al-Hariri that were published in Paris, because it was a discovery by a French art historian, was an important moment where they actually saw where modernism came from. This is how I'm going to explain it. Because, I'm sort of tired of this rhetoric of beating around the bush of how modernism European modernism came about, or what influenced, or what merged. And because I disagree with the theory of merger between past and present, but I will argue that what Jawad did is digest everything that he studied, read, and saw into something new. And so it's not about merging past and present, it's about understanding the roots of modernism and where that came from. And so seeing Maqamat al-Hariri, I mean, you're looking at a modern work of art. Two-dimensional, it is the reality of the work of art, is the surface itself. And so to them, that was a very important finding for Shaka Hassan, and Said, who would say that, abstraction actually is an Arab perspective on reality. He saw this as, something within the heritage and roots. And also saw Yahya al-Wasiti, the medieval the medieval artist of Maqamat al-Hariri, as a Mesopotamian grandfather. So it's the lineage that brought that, and that he was not surprised to see modernism in 13th century Iraq, for example, a modern artist as he saw him at the time. So what is important in this is an ease of finding a way to resolve the problem of representation that Iraqi artists of the modern age were feeling. How do they express their new reality? How do they express their new self, national, new country? Everything was new, everything was in the making, and everything was in the construction that they could actually affect. So we see works by Jawad like the Caliph's Company, which sort of, you can see the direct reference of where this is coming from. But what we also see, despite of what we would call aesthetic of the type in Islamic manuscripts, we see a different representation of figures in the Caliph's Company. This is where that digestion that happens between Mesopotamian as well as Islamic. You see this sort of new aesthetics that he develops that has been dubbed hilaliyat, crescent shapes, that he takes from referencing the Mesopotamian almond shapes eyes and frontal viewing. We see that in the work here, and the differentiation in personality between all these figures. Something we don't see, for example, in the Maqamat work. So portraiture of sorts shows up, different figures, different identities, and different effects that are taking place here. So this is sort of a conjuring up a history that, of course, is very imaginative. But it is the same aesthetics that we see in the other works that develop, and I will focus more on his series of Baghdadiat, dubbed Baghdadiat even during his lifetime by his contemporary, because they very much sort of drew from the city of Baghdad. So you can think of them as Baghdad, the historic city, the Abbasid city, but also Baghdad, the modern city of his time, his contemporary city. And in these two works, so we're going to see now when we look at the paintings that he's referencing a Baghdad that is not like the Baghdad I just showed you in the photos of the 1950s. There is, in a way, a denial of the status quo that was the reality of the time. And I would look at that denial as actually a point of resistance. By refusing to represent the reality of the city, by constructing an imaginative reality, he's actually registering a position. Jewad Selim was not political in the sense of being politicized, but humanity and people were very important to him. And so for him it was caring about the people, representing the people. And so in this way, he's actually sort of registering a position. At the same time, he's referencing, because this is a Baghdad that really didn't exist, not just then or maybe ever, that he's imagining as a heritage and background for the city. So in the young man and wife, these two people who are frontal position looking at us, and so in a way he's also de-orientalizing, de-exoticizing the figures that he's showing us with all sort of those crescent shapes and hilaliyat that you're seeing. seeing, the big almond-shaped eyes that are very Sumerian. They are in sort of traditional attire, and so this is a class-specific. Maybe we can think of traditional neighborhoods, but he uses that same concept in mother and child. Again, the sort of hilaliyat, as beautiful, simple work that is extremely representative of motherhood, which is an important theme in his work as well, but also the specific aesthetics. Or street musicians, for example, where we see, again, this could be suhoor, could be Eid, could be any moment of history. He doesn't tell us, but we see sort of the decorative aspect of the work that he is developing. Again, all the figures are in traditional attire, and they are actually an attire that may have not necessarily been very popular in most of the neighborhoods in Baghdad in the 1950s. And then, there are musicians in the street. Something is happening, something happy. There is a decorative wall behind it. So he's here sort of bringing or drawing from Islamic art in the repetition, in the sort of the decorative aspect of it, where the people who are the center of his work become actually pattern on the surface as well. So you see that with the rhythm, you see the repetition, you see the hilaliyat, you see the dynamic sort of aspects of his work. One of my most favorites is this one called Baghdadiate. And in general, Abbas Sarraf was a student who did his PhD on the Baghdad group and on Jewad Selim. And he kind of wrote a book that he interviewed Jewad and wrote a book that is open for interpretation, but documents a lot of the things that were taking place at the time. And he had sort of divided the Baghdadiate group into three categories. One that just sort of looks at the folkloric parts of the city, one that actually focuses on the vernacular buildings and artifacts, and one that is more about activities and happiness, children playing and things like that. But of course, all of them, we will see the same kind of representation, the same aesthetics that have been developed, the same tension between modernity and the past and the present, let's say. And that notion, that concept of istilham al-Quran that the Baghdad group coined, and he, particularly Jawad, articulated, that is a moment of mediation between past and present, a moment of drawing and digesting into a new negotiation of what representation is something that we see throughout the collection of these works. But in this specific work, I mean, if we look at it, if we were to analyze it, we do a formal analysis like our students do, and look at it, the details of it, from right to left, we see almost like two registries, which is something that you see in Mesopotamian art, and equally in Mesopotamian studies, for example, narrative is never a linear history. So it's a happening that is very discursive, and so you can see almost quotations from what you would see in many others of his works. I mean, look at these here; those are coming from that just street musicians that we just looked at. But I mean, different events that are taking place, a woman washing clothes with these two younger girls playing around, a woman carrying something on her head, delivering it, a father or a guy with two kids, amazing, two dogs fighting in here, a guy selling obstacles and a kid wanting to buy it, women speaking to each other from the fence, a thing that I used to do with my neighbors as a kid, speaking from without having to go out. Here's a guy doing, yes, yes. And of course, yes, you see there, actually, it's interesting representation of palm trees, but also, historical events. Here's a guy doing Mazgul. But there is something really interesting here. There's this duality of this is the only figure in the three figures sitting, maybe waiting for the Mazgul fish that is being cooked here. But we have a woman dressed in contemporary modern attire, out looking at us. We don't see her features very well, but she is looking at us. That's almost the only modern and a modern house structure here. This is one of the newer modern constructions of houses in town. While on the other hand, we have this old one, almost like this is a, could be kind of a shanashil, sort of a very abstract big shanashil, but there is a traditionally dressed woman that is almost sort of caged behind it, and she's sort of looking out at this woman in modern clothes, looking at us. What does that mean at that moment of time, and why he highlights this? This swath of color underneath it, sort of prints to it, and there's the sun, which is also a very sort of Mesopotamian reference of change of times that we see. Very few colors that are sort of joining this work together. So, I mean, actually, this sort of quotation here very much reminds me of Manet's Déjeuner sur l'heure, that was also kind of very provocative at the time because you had a woman dressed in modern attires looking out with the men also dressed in modern, looking at us, and so was seen as very provocative at the time. What exactly does this mean? I think here Jawad is really sort of highlighting that tension between the past and the modern, and the suggesting a way for move forward that is sort of embedded in something that is more traditional and historical. Let's imagine the next one. Oh, okay, thank you. All right. Otherwise, I would have had to perform, children's game. And this is one of the things that I got out of this, the Catalogue Raisonné as well. A lot of these names have changed. So, I think it's a translation thing as well, but, I'm sort of following what is in the Catalogue Raisonné. And you see that in the children's games, children, again, you see all of these sort of, hilaliyat shapes, whether it is objects that they're playing with, or their faces, their eyes, and you see the sort of the kite with the three dots down here. I mean, we have a lot of work still to do, to be honest, to understand what exactly were these referencing, and first I look at this and I think of like letters, like dots on a letter, but what are they? He never actually had letters. So if any of you know, please let me know. The cog cellar, again, you see the experimentation with pattern as well. Is there here too in the children's game, and it becomes an arabesque. It's a bunch of patterns and shapes, but they are children playing, and this is an amazing way of joining these two aspects in his work together. And that tension of the past and the future, aside from sort of showing it within aesthetics and content, and few of these works where Baghdadiat, where actually, those are sort of this almost like still lifes because they have no people in them. But you see, for example, in this one, portrait of a lorry. Lorry, a car, a truck, that is sort of a symbol of construction and modernism, turning towards us, but with stacked old houses, vernacular objects that sort of stacked in, again, very Islamic miniature type like. carried almost on top of this modern object that is coming towards us, but carrying the past. You kind of, see and understand that a way of thinking, or a way of struggling through this idea of the past and the present. But in something like in Kufa, for example, mosque, the great Kufa mosque, where he's actually almost layering the different historic representation of vernacular religious in the same work. And again, without people. There are very few works that Jewad has done that don't have people in them. And so that must specifically, mean something that he's trying to express through the change of environment, as opposed to what the effect of people and what people are doing. And of course, towards the end of his life, he does return to sculpture. Sculpture, and actually he gets his wish to make a major monument. In 1958, revolution happened, and he is contacted by Fatshadr, who was tasked to create the 14th July Revolution Monument. There were supposed to be 3 actually monuments, but 2 of them ends up happening. The unknown soldier that Fatshadr himself does, and then what became known as Nasb al-Hurriya, which initially was to be something else. Now this sort of big sketch that precedes the changes that happen and the shifts that happen in what the monument is, as something that has been destroyed and lost. I'm not sure exactly who destroyed it, but I think he may have actually destroyed it at the time. His daughters were not very clear on that either. But you see many of the references that he kind of then negotiate later in his work. Now, this work took sort of the last few years of his life. It was finished after he passed away before it was finished. Because of stress, he was hospitalized twice, and then he ended up dying of a heart attack. He was a heavy smoker. He was a very intense person. He worked way too hard and didn't sleep that enough, in my opinion. And so this is that caused him a lot of trouble. And he cast all the works, the bronze works, in Florence. And so he actually started the sketches and developing, and a lot of that changes. There are several maquettes of the process of this work, and you've seen some images of the work, some of the installations, but the progress of the work that took place. Also, they were installing in Baghdad, so that didn't help, I'm sure. But what is interesting is that his daughters, for this catalog, Raisonné, were able to identify the sequence of shipping and installation of the different cage her legs are sort of cut. There is a lot of sort of symbolism and iconography that takes place here, as well as throughout all of it. Some that draws from Mesopotamian, some that draws from Islamic, some that draws from vernacular. There has been many stories about the whores. Of course, the first 2 statues that were in Baghdad for the longest time were General Mode and King Faisal, and they were both on horses. And so perhaps this is Jewad's new Arabian horse that enters the scene of Baghdad. References to this you see the lines of water, reference to Mesopotamian rituals, and so this in itself is to be deciphered and deconstructed. You will read the history of Iraq through it, and it also is to be read almost from right to left as almost like an Arabic poem that tells the story. And again, the sun up here that we saw in the Baghdadiate as well. So again, it has that sun with all the sort of connotation it brings, but it's also Shamash, the reference to the Mesopotamian sun. This image actually that you're seeing is for the longest time everyone saw Latif al-Ali's image, because that although we all have images, but it's high. It's really difficult to take a full image of it for use. So everybody for publication were using this. This is actually a new one. So this was taken last year prior to the publishing of the book by Hala Mirwis of Tarkib platform in Baghdad after the restoration of the work. And so I think I have a older one where maybe no. You actually can see the difference of color of the marble. This is the new marble. So the old marble was removed completely, and it was a whiter marble than this one. So we don't know what the effective time is going to do to it, but hopefully it will maybe kind of matches the old one. Yes, it's kind of unfortunate that the restoration was sort of done in haste. You see some of the details of the work here, as you can see, and you can see the color of the marble behind it. And so this became the masterpiece, sort of, the finale of Jawad's life and work, and a legacy that stays in Iraq and in Baghdad till today, tells the story of Iraq, the new Iraq, the modern Iraq, but Iraq as sort of the people, the nation, not necessarily the country and the politics. Jawad and his sort of experiments, were very, the concept of identity politics that everybody has, engaged with when writing about modernism were an important factor. So for Jawad, the cohesion and representation of a nation was an objective, but because he cared about the people themselves, and he was never representing the government of the nation, but rather the people of the nation. And so within the Nasb al-Hurriya, for example, there are references to Kurds, to Arabs, to Turkmens, to the different also identities that constitute Iraq. And it is a shame that while they have restored the work today in Iraq, that they're not studying it, because I think it actually gives a great example of cohesion and coexistence for Iraqis today, something that actually the modernists of Iraq knew very well. All right, I'm going to stop and we can talk. How about that? Or just discussions. Because I know, for example, many of you looked into this and worked on that, on these works, so I would love to, hear from you.
Just question regarding the documents you utilized for the book. And which kind of documents you utilized? And because, how can I say, I was thinking at the end of his life, he lived in Florence, as I remember, right? Jewad Selim. Jewad Selim lived in Florence at the end.
Well, he not lived, but was spending time because he was casting.
There are documents that about his stay in Florence, for example. You have it or not? You found some documents.
So let me be clear that I was not the editor of this Catalogue Raisonné. I only, I helped and consulted them. Because in studying this, I wrote the first chapter introduction to it. But I do know that Jawad himself apparently was very conscious about retaining documents. And then his wife Lorna, after his death, and she took everything to London with her, to the UK when she went, and had it very organized. his daughters remember growing up with these sort of, boxes and containers and documents. And so his daughter, Zainab, the eldest, who's a neuroscientist, was a retired neuroscientist, so really very, very structured, made sure that, that she had sort of Excel sheets for all of these. So she, went through them and through all the documentation.
So there is an archive. So
There is apparently a very good archive.
okay, good.
Yes.
You had access to that archive from this book?
Well, I mean, it was his daughter that co-edited the book because she worked on the archives, and that Nima Sakarji from Bonhams knew about her work at the archives, and so thought, it's a natural thing to do. Zainab wanted to do something for the longest time, but she just really didn't know how to go about it.
Well, there are no projects to digitalize, for example, this material, these documents or not, as you know.
So, I am in the process of trying to convince them to, yes, to small steps to consider, because they are very generous in terms of sharing. So they don't have a problem with doing that. And they are aware of what do we do with all of this later, And so hoping that we do get to the point where the archives will be more accessible for everyone.
Okay, thank you. It's strange because I lived in Florence, and within the Iraqi artistic community,
Yes.
nobody ever speaks about the fact that Jewad Selim was in Florence.
No one ever speaks up.
About the fact that he was in Florence.
Really?
I didn't know until now. And
Yeah.
now all the Iraqis, the artists,
It was in Fiesole, not in Florence.
the diaspora who are now living in Florence.
Yeah.
I never heard about this.
But I mean, that was so long ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. But because Muhammad Ghani Hikmat was the one who finished the monument after him, and he was his student, and he was also supervising the casting, not just and he was in Florence as well, or at least.
Fiesole, Fiesole, yes,
Yeah.
close to France, as I remember.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of very interesting.
Never been mentioned. But one thing that would be proud.
But actually, there are records in Florence of his time there, which is interesting because he got sick. He was even in the hospital for a while. There are documents of that as well. So
Even the contracts, you have the contract. Okay, good.
yeah, exactly.
Thank you, wonderful lecture. Is there any clarity on the role of Lorna Selim in finishing the monument, the role of Ghani Hikmat, the role of Rafat Jadarchi?
Yeah.
Because we keep hearing of the role, this person finished it, this person finished it. I've heard Lorna finished it. I've heard Muhammad Ghani Hikmat finished it. There was some talk about Rafat Jadarchi.
Oh yeah, Rafat Jadarchi was I mean, he's the one who designed the base for the monument, and he's the one who was commissioned to do the monument. So the architectural part of this, the travertine sort of surface, that was Rafat Jadarchi who did. And I mean, this was a work that took several years to finish, and a large amount of sketches that are some in the Jadarchi collection, some in the Muhammad Ghani Hikmat's collection, as well as a maquette that of one. So there were 3 maquettes actually of the process, because things evolved and shifted and changed. But it was finalized before he died, so nothing changed before he died. But like that maquette, one of those maquettes actually is in the Muhammad Ghani Hikmat's estate, which I'm having in the exhibition in Bard, as a matter of fact. Now, it shows, because these maquettes shows you the shifts and so do the sketches. And we know that Muhammad Ghani was, as his student, he was his assistant. Now, and he would definitely be supervising the casting. So Rafat Jadarchi tells us also in his book, that he gives a full detailed account of the process of how things were going and how the shipments were coming. Because he talks about the excitement of opening the boxes, getting the works, because he had no idea what he was going to get when he opens the box. Things that were kept on changing from the original drawings. All they showed, by the way, all they showed for the for Abdul Karim Qasim was one sketch. That was not what ended up happening at the end. But, Abdul Karim Qasim, did not sort of keep tabs on them, and nor did Rifat. And so while in Paris things were changing, there are stories about, how also that first, by the way, piece of the work was solid, so it was really heavy, and the others were hollow. So, they were learning as they go in the process of how to do things. So I imagine that, and I mean, you're right, that's a good question. Things need to be clearer about the process of how these things happen. But I imagine that, Hamid Ghani would be supervising the casting, making sure that, the vision of Jawad is fulfilled. And once all the casting was, everything was shipped, he was on the ground as well as Rifat, as well as Lorna, supervising that, making sure everything is installed as, because even in some of these photos, you see, where was it? There's a photo that shows, even, here, and there's other photos that show them on site. Even Zainab, as a child, was on site. And so, they were all involved in one way or the other. The three figures that we're talking about, Rafat and Muhammad and Lorna. And Lorna really, she adored Jawad, and she really took care of his, his archive, all of his work and his legacy. So, so she probably was there. Particularly, he just, you can imagine, he just passed away. Everything is, so passionate, and so she was there, making sure that everything is installed correctly.
Nana, you talked about the process, and I'm curious as to whether the family was consulted when the background of the marble was changed, because it's such a big, major addition to the work. It interferes with the original idea from the white background or off-white to this. They're two, to me, they look two completely different works. It's very, were they consulted?
Can I also ask a question in connection to that? Why did they change it?
So, I mean, the monument sat there for a very long time without any restoration, any cleaning, any work. Actually, and right after the invasion of 2003, they did decide to clean it, to wash it with extreme power that actually caused some cracking in the marble. Now, it's not structural cracking, but it was not in a very good shape. Because I saw it like months before restoration and months after restoration. The whole site was restored, as a matter of fact. So, this is, al-Hurriya sits at Saht al-Tahrir, the Tahrir Square. Behind it is Hadith al-Ummah Garden. In the middle of the Ummah Garden, there is a motherhood statue by Rahal, Khalid al-Rahal, sat in a pond of water. And then on the other end, facing Saht al-Tayaran Square, there is a mural by Faik Hassan. And they were all neglected for the longest time and really in bad shape of restoration. When did you see them, Sultan? When you went before they
I went twice. I went once and it was clear like this, and then they had the Turkish company come and it was covered and very disappointing. So I went in 2020 and 2021.
So I think I went before, maybe 2020 and then 2021, but I went after it was finished. So as Sultan just told us, it was a Turkish construction company that did the work, not an art restorer's sort of, company of any sort. And it was so fast. It was so fast. That was amazing.
Can I just share a story that I showed this video to my students in class about how the Iraqis have so much ownership to this for the structure during the 2019 uprising, October or something, that the Iraqis were protecting It was very nice to see, but I felt like every time I watched this video, I cringed because they were handling it with their hands and they were trying to clean and protect, and they really felt like they're trying to take ownership of this monument that meant so much to them. And they even started putting lights around the brass, the steel.
Yes, yeah.
Literally cables of electricity,
Yes.
and turning it on so that it's lit up at night.
Yes.
And it was beautiful in one hand, and it's
But
there.
of course, didn't help.
And on the other hand, it wasn't very helpful with
Yes,
preserving
this,
that.
the Tishrin revolution, which October, which yes, I mean they did, and it's really interesting though. I mean, first let me finish answering the question that Salwan Bana referenced. So the family were not consulted. They actually did not even know that this happened. But you know, after washing it in 2003 and causing the cracks, they knew something is going. They will need to fix it. But nothing was happening because there was no budget, no money. But it is the private bank league that started this sort of series of renovations and restorations, and so they funded these restorations. It with the approval of the municipality of Baghdad, but with no supervision. And so they cleaned up the garden, the Hadiqat al-Ummah, and the Rahal sculpture, the statue that sat in a pond of water, now sits in a big fountain that dances with water dancing, kind of like the Dubai fountain. They're very proud of that. And which of course, you know, is going to cause a lot of problems for the statue that was not meant to be sprayed with water continuously. And then but the garden's beautiful, and now people go and hang out there, which is why the reason why everyone is sort of like thinking, okay, we're going to be quiet. Not that, you know, it's going to make a difference of what we say, but we document for the future, for history. And then the Fayak Hassan mural in the back there. I mean, so here they changed the marble. Luckily, I guess, you know, we're told we're lucky that nothing was stolen, nothing was lost. They didn't really clean the pieces. They're not clean because already you actually see sort of lines of dirt on the new marble. They threw away, by the way, the old marble. All of it was thrown away. Yes. And so, and then the miniature, the mural by Hassan, they kind of like, you know, made it because it had like an iron bar holding it for a while. So they kind of must have treated the structure. However, it is done with mosaic, and a lot of pieces of that mosaic are lost. And the solution was to actually put some putty in, haphazardly actually, kind of, because it really was ugly. But yes, sorry.
Thank you for all of this. I have a question. Somewhere during your presentation at the beginning, you said you don't think that Jawad was political.
Yeah, I mean, so the difference between political and politicized, let's say. So he was not involved in the politics, but I don't think it's possible for anyone to not be political to start with, and especially be in the arts. And so, but the way he dealt with the politics was through the humans.
Yeah.
So as opposed to, because during this time, other artists like Mahmoud Sabri who were advocating for a specific social role for the artists to be, you know, sort of directly political. Jawad was not that type. He would not sort of, you know, make statements, political statements or protest. But in his work, he would definitely, you know.
Okay, could someone do a reading of his work from a more political
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
Because that's how I see it.
Yeah,
I see
absolutely.
it also very politicized.
Yes.
Well,
So, I mean, you know, maybe maybe I'm not using the right words here because I can't find them. But you know, I think you're understanding what I mean. But you definitely can have a political reading, not even Nasb al-Hurriya, right? Which he labored over a lot, by the way. But all of this, you know, and the absence speaks louder than what's presented. So, you know, I think definitely there is. That's why I say this catalogue is very important because it allows us to be able to study this material that was so, you know, scattered. And this work that you're seeing here It says here the National Museum of Modern Art in Baghdad. I think it's lost. I don't think it's there. I think it's been stolen. Have you seen this there?
No, I went, I didn't see this one.
Yeah, I have not seen this one nor in the storage. So, so there's a lot more work to be done. But this is definitely, this allows us to do the work. And, and the Catalogue it doesn't really offer, even though Zainab tries to in a scientific way, divide her father's life and style of development into these categories, which of course we all know that artists don't work that way. And so, this allows us, however, to take this further and do the reading of the works in the various sort of methodologies. Yeah.
How this is called the Catalogue Raisonné, which is by definition it's encompassing every single artwork known to have made by this artist.
Of sculpture and painting.
Without the drawings, so no works on paper. So the issue is that we know that there's a work in Moscow, we know there was a bunch of works in Baghdad, we know there's a bunch of works in Europe and maybe in the UK. We know that there was a traveling exhibition that went to half a dozen venues in the US between the early 1950s, sponsored by Amadis. So we know that there were works in North America,
Right.
Europe, and the Middle East. And so how do we know, and in Russia, so how do we know that this is everything that he produced?
We don't, we never know. So, I mean, they really try to trace all these works and find information. I mean, I helped contact some people who Jewad painted the father of, or the mother bought something, and it's not easy. There are some that they were never able to contact. We have the work, but we don't know where it is at the moment. There are others that, we don't have the work or image of the work, but we know there was such a work. And so there was a lot of reconstruction made, for this Catalogue to also enhance the images, as well as locate them and document them. So this is, and also there was this other problem that, we all know of fakes and that, authentication of works. And so supposedly everything in this Catalogue has been authenticated and documented. There are other works that, maybe out there but have not been located or have not been authenticated. And so, and that's a whole other problem that, cannot be resolved through a Catalogue nor through a family state, so.
I'm sorry, I have another question.
Yeah.
So this is the greatest of the greatest of the greatest of the great. Why hasn't there never been an exhibition of Jewad Selim?
Yeah, very good question. So apparently I hear that they want to do that. They want to do one in Baghdad now.
In Baghdad. I'm not lending.
The Ministry of Culture wants to do that, yes. Well, I mean, clearly, that's a whole different story. But I mean, so there was a retrospective of Jawad after he died in Iraq, in Baghdad, at the Museum of Modern Art. That was the time that they got all of his work. And I mean, we don't have the catalog, but because that's for the exhibition at Bard, I'm also trying to find what was exhibited, but I'm looking at the whole group, not just Jewad. And even the whole group, Sultan, this is the first exhibition that's going to be happening for the whole group, the Baghdad group for modern art. Other than the exhibitions they held in Baghdad during their time, there's never been an exhibition.
I have another question. Why was this group sexist?
Why were they?
Why was this group sexist? Why didn't they have women?
Oh, they were not sexist. I don't know if they were sexist.
Why was there only 2 women and there's so many men?
So, many stories are told about this. I remember talking to my friend's mother, Lam'an Amizeki, who was a physician, a doctor. She said that her and her sister Sani Hans, that they were like, we want to go to medical school and we're going to force our way through medical school. They put on their abayas and went to the medical school, to the dean's school, and said, we want to register and we're not going to let you stop us. And he said, did we tell you can't register? Why aren't you? Go ahead, register. And they registered. So what was it? Was it that, there was a sort of an unwritten code about women in the arts? I mean, we know that Su'ad Attar exhibited with them when she was 13 years old, in the Mansour exhibition, That's the one that the king actually sponsored. Batul Keki, on the other hand, says that, you know, her family were not crazy about her becoming an artist at the time. But she did become an artist. So is it that women were not allowed or not expected to or not accepted? You know, growing up in Iraq, you know, whenever I hear about people talking about women and women's role in depression, I'm like, it's not my experience. I lived in a country that, you know, was never said no.
You said the group, I didn't say the country.
The group was open. I mean, Nazia was in the group. They, you know, so there were other women involved in different directions, different capacities. But you know, why not artists? I don't know. Salwa, do you have an answer?
I interviewed 3 of these women, Sa'ad Al-Attar, Madiha Omar, and Nazia.
Yes.
Nazia on the phone,
Yeah.
okay? And I was working on the women exhibit then. So Nazia wanted to be part of that. She said she never had an opportunity, and I was surprised. But Sa'ad Al-Attar accused the group of sexist, definitely. And she said that they did not include her on purpose.
She was 13 years old.
That was another one, but she had applied when she was older, like still in her teens, maybe she was 19. She said, I have it in my notes.
Okay.
But
So Jawad was dead already.
and this is the reason I had, when I had curate that exhibit for your collection, Sultan, I placed Saad al-Attar in the center and all the men around her. And I was waiting to see who will notice her. So, but, and Madiha Omar, similar, because I was surprised, was my question to her was, why weren't you included? Because you were, you know, traveling out of the country.
She was out of the country.
Well, she was, yeah.
Yeah.
During that period. So my question to her was, where was your work? I mean, wasn't any of it circulating in the 50s and 60s later on, and after she came back?
Well, when she came back, she was part of the One Dimension group. I mean, I feel like I'm defending them
But,
now.
yeah.
But no, I mean, she was. Shaka invited her, and she was part of
Yeah,
it.
but I don't think to the extent that we can say they had equal opportunity anywhere near equal.
I don't know. I feel like we need more.
Or if there's,
research on
we
this.
need to do more research,
Yeah.
absolutely, I agree with that. But that's the knowledge I have directly from these 3 artists.
But then, you know, Naziha Delemi was a minister in Iraq in the 60s. So, you know, so I don't know. I mean, you know, is it a cultural thing? Is it a structural systematic thing?
It's structural. I think this group were very much thinking about this group.
But this group, I mean, included Lorna. They were doing.
I have to say something.
Yeah.
The group you're saying they included women, he had his wife and sister. No, so I'm saying he's amazing, I love him.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, I'm also full of holes, I have a million bad things about me, but I'm just saying that factually, that the women he included were his wife and his sister. And we know from research, and you are the, mashallah, the doyen of this study, that there was Naziha Rashid, who was active in the 50s, that there was
And she
Naziha
exhibited
Omar.
with them one time.
Naziha.
Yeah.
And
And
what
the
was
artists
Naziha?
actually, you know, when Jawad started the Baghdad group for modern art, it was difficult for him to get members. Remember, there was a Rawad led by Fayed Hassan, and Jawad was a member of a Rawad. Oh, I mean, you know,
The busts, the bronze busts of the.
Jawad was perpetually in
And the
love
Rahal
with
as well. Yes, Khalid the Rahal as well.
Yeah.
It's 14 women in a good way.
No, I mean, you're right. Portrayal of women was never degrading or any problematic, but, you know, I think what Sultan and Salwa are referring to is more of figures as artists. There were other women artists. Why are they not, you know, part of that? And it is something to be, for sure, to be, I mean, this is even at the exhibition at Bard, you know, the director of art is like, can we get more women in this group? I can't invent them. So, you know, here's what we have.
So you mentioned the 1957 exhibition that the king inaugurated
Yes.
in Mansour Club.
Yes,
I remember reading once that there was Ma'arad al-Marfudat,
yes,
the exhibition of
Yes.
the rejected works.
yes.
And so there was a parallel exhibition.
Yes.
Can you tell us anything? I mean, I'm curious.
So this is why I say perhaps it was an intellectual elitism that, you know, is the issue and not sexism, because Jawad was on that committee for choosing the works for the
The
exhibition.
Mansour Club, the 57, the king, the royal. Yeah.
Yes. And so there were works that were rejected, including by Mawrid Arab, were rejected because they did not represent the quality that they wanted. And so these other works went and they organized, Mawrid Arab and others, they went and organized their own exhibition, Ma'rad al-Marfu'at. Yeah.
And that's fascinating.
That is, but that also tells you about the tension between the artists that exists still today, as we know, in Iraq. Who's accepted in what circle. So I think that's a way in seeing some other things. And so they wanted to organize an exhibition to send to Moscow, right? At first, Jawad and his group, were not interested. But then when they saw the list of who the artists who are going to be proposed, then they objected and said, no, we'll organize it because that doesn't show the quality of work. So definitely they had an understanding of quality of art, of aesthetics. This is why I think, that's sort of, my opinion, that when it came to the point of Jawad given an ultimatum, do you stay with the Ruwad group or do you start your own group? He ended up starting his own group. I think he thought of a Ruwad has reached its end, of what they can do because they're sort of, recycling styles and just, kind of talking within each other and not innovating beyond.
Considering the prominence of this work over time, is there any studies on the engagement of the public with such an important monument in Iraq? Or even, for example, what Sultan was referring to, the young people protected it, similar to what they did in Cairo also.
Yeah.
So there seems to be an emotional or link to it that is even goes beyond the emotive aspect into other aspects. And was there any studies over time? Because when we think of who commissioned this work, and the governments and all the revolutions that came after, that actually were against those who commissioned this work in the beginning, it's a miracle that it still stands.
It's because it never had the image of any of the rulers. If it had the portrait of Abdul Karim Qasim, it would have been gone.
Yeah, but it references Nasb al-Hurriya.
Of course, and it references Abdul Karim Qasim by the image of the soldier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, what kept it safe all this time? During the invasion, when the museum was looted, and what kept this one monument safe?
I think to start with, it's too high up that no one's gonna go up and steal, and it's too public. So but I think also it has become part of the city, and for Iraqis, it's just part of.
But also, what kept it safe from the Americans from the States.
Yes.
Not the Iraqis, but Iraqi wolves, they do guard it. Yeah, we
Right.
kept the Americans away from it, but it's too big to them.
It's too open. I think it's positioned like the other one, the one that it's too not threatening. Let's say in concept. It's freedom. It's generic. It's abstract. The monument of the martyr monument, which because of the whole Iran-Iraq war, it was a base. Soldiers were stationed there during it. They had it closed and they defaced it. If the longer Americans spent time with any object, they destroyed it. But the Monument of Freedom was too hot in Iraq. But the Monument of Freedom was too high and elsewhere.
But it's an interesting topic.
No, it is very interesting.
Current public art is being installed all over the city.
Yeah.
Would any one of these objects be at some point protected by the public and
Yes.
have added meaning over the
Yes.
years?
Who knows?
So,
But it's
this kind of new engagement.
Very much. I very much agree with you. I don't think there has been any systematic study of reception, but we do know that people reference it. Like I said, it's always in the background of the city. When they wanted to do the revolution, they did it there. They cleaned it, they protected it, cleaned the streets. But when I was doing this exhibition at Bard, because I wanted to show the legacy of the group, not just the group themselves. So, look at the 1980s generation and attempts for reactivating the Baghdad group. But there is no, so I started speaking to some of the contemporary artists, right? Do you know Jewad Selim? Oh yes, we know Jewad Selim. Do you know the Baghdad group from modern art? Yeah, we've heard of them. They know nothing about Jewad Selim or the Baghdad group from modern art. They are not taught in the 9 years of education between the Art Institute and the Art Academy, other than this is the work of Jewad Selim. But that's all they know about it. This is Nasb al-Hurriya by Jewad Selim. Jewad Selim was a great artist, Baghdadiate and Nasb, an important group. That's all they know. And so, it's an emotional attachment that they have with the Monument of Freedom.
If you don't have any more questions, thank you very much. This has been